Om Tapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine Tapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine Avatara varishtaya Ramakrishna te namah Asato ma sadgamaya Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya Mrityormamritangamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let us offer our salutations to Sri Ramakrishna, the embodiment of all religions, the Supreme God Incarnate. Let us pray to Him to lead us from the unreal to the real, to lead us from the darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge, to lead us from death to immortality. Today's topic, surrender to God. Sri Ramakrishna has said there are so many paths to go towards God, and surrender to God is one of the ways. But the point is, you must really aspire for the realization of God. Then only any way you take, you will reach the goal. But you must really aspire for the realization of the truth. Then only all these paths are open to us. If we don't have that aspiration to realize the God, then no way is open to us. But situations, circumstances, sufferings, they come to us in order to make us understand that we should really aspire for the realization of truth. You must have read in the Bhagavad Gita, it begins with Arjun's depression and also confusion. Depression because of confusion. He confessed his weakness. He could not decide what is really right. He could not decide what action need to be taken when he saw in the battlefield his own relations, cousins and veterans. He saw them all, and suddenly he was down with a kind of weakness which made him lost all his energy and willpower. He felt as if he has no strength at all. But then he confesses his weakness to Lord Krishna, and he expresses his utter confusion in performing the duties. And the only qualification Arjun had was that he had implicit faith in Lord Krishna, who would save him from all situations. The Pandavas really were very devoted to Lord Krishna. In fact, before the commencement of the war, Duryodhan ran to Dwarka in order to get the support of Lord Krishna. And then Arjun also went. He was also very keen to have Krishna. Finally, when Lord Krishna gave the option to Duryodhan whether he would want him or he would like to have all the Yadava army which would fight on the behalf of Duryodhan. So he gave the option open. Duryodhan thought that army would be better than a single person, Krishna. So he opted for the big army, who were all very valiant fighters. Arjun wholeheartedly he wanted Lord Krishna alone. He was so much concentrated and focused on Krishna. He was afraid whether Duryodhana would ask Krishna on his side. Seeing the earnestness of Arjun and his wholehearted support, wholehearted faith in Lord Krishna, made Krishna agree that he would be on his side. So, his surrender to Krishna started from that point. Because he surrendered totally to Lord Krishna, he won the Mahabharata war. So, he had surrendered himself totally, fully to Lord Krishna. Karpanya doshopahata svabhavaha pritchami tvam dharma sammudacetaha yachre yasyan nishchitam bruhitan me shishyasteham shadiman tvam prapannam. Gita chapter 2 verse number 7. Arjun says, my natural qualities are besieged by weakness and apprehension, and my thinking bewildered regarding righteousness. O Lord Krishna, I am asking you to please state what is differently good for me. I am your disciple. I have surrendered to you. Kindly instruct me. So, the Bhagavad Gita starts with this concept of surrender. Whatever may be the situation, don't worry. Simply surrender to God. Everything will be straightened out. And interestingly and significantly, the Bhagavad Gita ends with Sri Krishna's final instruction to Arjun to take refuge in him after giving up all considerations of right and wrong. Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja ahantva sarvapapebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. relinquishing all dharmas, surrender to me exclusively. I will deliver you from all sins. Grieve not. This is the verse in chapter 18th, verse number 66. So Bhagavad Gita starts with the concept of surrender and concludes with the same idea of surrender to God. This stress on surrender to God in the beginning and at the end of the Bhagavad Gita is profoundly significant. Some savants believe, and rightly so, that total surrender to God is the final as also the central message of the Bhagavad Gita. This is especially true with the Bhakti schools of Vedanta. The acharyas of the devotional schools have gone into great details in explaining the nature of surrender to God, its conditions and types, and the way a devotee should practice it. According to Vedanta Deshika, the acharya of the Vishishta Dvaita school, surrender could be of three types. In the first type, called Swanishtha, the devotee takes refuge in God after understanding the nature of God and of himself. The second type of devotee is Uktinishtha. He may not know all these details, but having firm faith in the instruction of the Lord or the Acharya, resign himself to God. The third type, Acharya Nishtha. He takes refuge in the Acharya, who in turn prays to God to protect him. So, these three nishthas are there: Swanishtha, Uktinishtha, Acharya Nishtha. These are all three aspects of surrendering to God. Madhusudan Saraswati, a great scholar, while commentating upon the above verse of the Gita, has described three degrees of surrender depending upon the closeness of the devotee to God. With the maturity of spiritual practice, three types of surrender to God come out. One, I belong to Him indeed. Second, He belongs to me indeed. Third, I am He indeed. See how nicely they have explored. Amazing. Any field you take, they have gone to the maximum. They have reached the end of it. That's the beauty of spiritual personalities. They don't stop at some visions. They go to the end, final end, and then they come out with the message which is very beneficial to all of us. So whoever wants to follow the path of surrendering to God must understand these three aspects. I belong to Him, He belongs to me, I am He. According to Swami Akhandananda Saraswati, another great scholar, for true surrender to God, three conditions must be fulfilled. First, what are the conditions? Simply say I am surrendering to God doesn't mean that you have surrendered to God. But it must qualify all these things. He says, first, the devotee must depend upon God and none else, not even on his own strength or ability. That's the first condition. For example, Lord Krishna came to the help of Draupadi only when she had given up even her own grip on her garment and raised both her hands in total surrender. As long as she held her sari, she did not come up. Krishna didn't come up to show. Only when she raised both her hands, leaving everything to God. Oh Lord, you protect my modesty. Finished. Then Lord did protect her. So that is the first type. Depending upon God and none else, not even on his own strength or ability. That's the first type. The second type, the second condition, not type. 3 conditions must be fulfilled. Second condition is, one who takes refuge in God cannot become the refuge of another. That means ekanishtha. That's very important when you are really practicing spirituality in your life. All these things are very important. And third, one must not delay taking refuge in God. There must be real earnestness and intensity. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, there's a word called Ishvara Pranidhan. It means surrender to God. It has been mentioned in 3 places and in 3 different senses and contexts. Initially, in the first chapter, Samadhipada of Yoga Sutras, it is prescribed as an independent means of attaining Samadhi. And its meaning and technique have been described clearly in 5 sutras. Secondly, Ishvara Pranidhana is mentioned as one of the parts of Kriya Yoga, the 3 parts of which are recommended by the sage Patanjali as the very essence of a sane, healthy way of life. Finally, Ishvara Pranidhana is also mentioned as one of the 5 niyamas or observances. From the analysis of the view of the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras, we may infer that Ishvara Pranidhana is looked upon firstly as a goal or the highest state of realization in itself, after which nothing remains to be done and God takes over the responsibility for the rest. Secondly, Ishvara Pranidhana could be taken as a spiritual practice as one of the niyamas. Finally, it can also be looked upon as a way of life, an integral part of one's living, as hinted in the definition of Kriya Yoga. Those who consider surrender as the highest spiritual state, give it the status of the 5th Purushartha. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha is 4. No? This is considered as 5th one. 5th Purushartha. It is superior even to moksha or liberation. Ishvara Pranidhana may also be translated as surrender in God. The aspirant loses his identity in the divine and functions as a joyous instrument in his hands. Naturally, he becomes a channel through which great missions get done. The sense of fulfillment is spontaneous and need not be striven for. According to Girish Chandra Ghosh, in other spiritual paths, one may, by self-effort, reach a certain coveted goal, but in self-surrender, there is no such end or limit or goal. However, the resigned mental state of such a person surrendered to God is like that of a proverbial bird on the mast of a ship that was unaware when the ship set sail and entered the ocean from the mouth of Ganga. When it realized that it was too far away from the shore, it tried to fly back to the shore, but even after flying in all the 4 directions, it could not find the shore. Ultimately, it settled down, tired, on the mast of the ship, in total surrender and free from worry. Swami Chidananda, one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, has endorsed this by saying that true self-surrender comes only after extreme self-effort. What's the state of mind of that blessed soul who surrenders completely to God? He is like a defeated king standing in front of his victor. He is absolutely helpless and totally at the mercy of his conqueror. The same is the state of the mind of a devotee surrendered to God, except that he does not have any fear or apprehension which the vanquished king might have. There was a famous Sufi saint, his name Ibrahim. He once asked a slave, "What's your name?" "That by which you call me," the slave said. "What work will you do?" "Whatever you ask me to do." "Where will you live?" "Wherever you keep me." "What will you eat?" "Whatever is supplied by you." "What salary do you want?" "Whatever you give." A slave can't have any choices. Ibrahim was deeply impressed by these answers and exclaimed, "This should be our attitude towards God." Meera, a great saint, she also expresses the same attitude. She says in one of her compositions, "I shall wear the dress given by the Lord and eat what is supplied. I shall sit whenever I am asked to and will be sold if the Lord decides to sell me away." Saint Francis de Sales, another saint, he gives the illustration of a statue placed in a nick to explain the state of total self-surrender. If one were to ask the statue where it is satisfied, whether it is satisfied with its state, the statue would say, "Yes, because my master has placed me here." Suppose your master were to keep you at some other place, would you mind? "No, for I have no wish of my own." "Do you see your master?" "No, but he sees me." See how nice, most significant. Swami Chidananda, another direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, he has endorsed such an attitude in one of his speeches delivered at the first convention of the Ramakrishna mission in Belur. In his address, Chidananda said, "Be like an arrow that darts from the bow. Be like the hammer that falls on the anvil. Be like the sword that pierces its object. The arrow does not murmur if it misses the target. The hammer does not fret if it falls on a wrong place. And the sword does not lament if it is broken in the hands of its wielder. Yet there is joy in being made, used and broken, and equal joy in being finally set aside." Beautiful concept. The high state of total surrender described obviously cannot be attained easily. Most of us have a strong will and feel that we can do spiritual practice. It is therefore not only natural but rational and wise to undertake various spiritual practices, considering ourselves as a doer. The ultimate aim of all spiritual practices, however, is a total elimination of the unripe ego. In whichever way it is done, it is immaterial. In the path of self-surrender, elimination of ego is tried from the very beginning. The spiritual aspirant begins with both self-effort and surrender. Purushakara, thus called self-effort, Sharanagati, thus called surrender. At the same time, in its simplest form, the practice consists in praying to God and mentally surrendering to Him at the end of the day all actions done during the day. Gradually, this practice is repeated more and more often during the day till it becomes associated with every action, however trivial. This type of surrender can be done in relation to the fruits of action also. At the completion of each activity, one may sincerely and seriously surrender the fruits, good or bad, to God and be at peace. Many among those who try to practice this type of self-surrender often get into a mechanical rut of merely uttering such words as Krishna Arpanamastu. This is because although we make an act of surrender, we are really not sure whether God accepts them or not. It is therefore essential also to remember that God accepts whatever we offer. Then we shall be very careful not to commit any evil. Such a conviction that God accepts the acts and their fruits which we offer can transform our life. While surrendering actions may be easier for some, surrendering the fruits of action may not be. For essentially it also means acceptance of the results of our past actions with equanimity and without joy or sorrow. Unfortunately, we don't want to do good but want the fruits of good actions in the form of happiness. We do not refrain from doing evil but don't want to accept the fruits of evil actions. That's what's going on in the world. For more important than surrendering action and their fruits is the renunciation of one's will and agentship. A hint as to how this could be done is found in the Bhagavad Gita in such expressions as Sarva Sankalpa Sannyasi, Sarva Arambha Parityagi, which imply that one must not perform a willed action. A number of desires and sankalpas, the urge to fulfill those desires, might arise in us. Let them not be converted into action. If we go on curbing our urge to act, gradually our will would become weaker and weaker. This is illustrated in the conduct of Girish Chandra Ghosh after he had surrendered his will and given his power of attorney to Sri Ramakrishna. Once in the presence of Sri Ramakrishna, Girish happened to say, I shall do this. Immediately Sri Ramakrishna corrected him, no, you can't act like that anymore. Say, I shall do this if God wills. Say like that. Sri Ramakrishna corrects him. A day came when Girish did not do anything by his own will. At times, Girish waited for long hours before knowing the Lord's will. Once he was found sitting perspiring and thirsty with a glass of water in front of him without drinking it because he did not get the command from God to drink. Swami Adbhutanandaji also, one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, he also would often wait for days, even months, to find out the will of God or get his direct command before doing something. Subduing one's will and willed desires can also be done by the practice of obedience to a superior authority. In religious organizations, this obedience is towards the official head or superior of the monastery or an ashram, and his or her commands are implicitly followed. In general, the spiritual guru's instructions carry the same value for disciple. In the secular setting, following the commands or directions of the senior members in the family, father, mother, etc., or of the boss in an office, also can serve the purpose of subduing one's will if taken in the spiritual sense. Besides, There are a number of social laws and customs, rules and regulations which regulate the ethical and social conduct of people. A student, a teacher, a householder, a doctor, all are expected to observe ethical codes of conduct. This also helps in regulating a wayward will and can be spiritually made use of. In religious communities, there is a rule which the members are supposed to observe. Finally, very often during our day-to-day life, we are forced to accept such situations that are not of our choice or liking, and also to act as others expect us to. Our will and powers are at every step restricted and thwarted. To accept them with grace as willed by God is one of the methods of learning to surrender to God. If one doesn't take a personal decision or willfully initiate an action, accepts whatever comes to his lot in natural course and offers the actions and their fruits to God, one can ultimately transform oneself into an instrument in the hands of God, which is the ultimate aim of all spiritual striving. Commenting upon the relevant Yoga Sutra, Hariharananda Aranya has very pertinently pointed out that without constant remembrance of God, Ishvara Pranidhana cannot be practiced. He also proposes a very effective method. Place, as it were, one's mind into God's tranquil mind. In other words, think oneself to be in God and God to be in oneself. And then think that all actions are being done by God. According to the Gita too, God residing in the hearts of all beings moves them as puppets. Yantra Rudhani Maya comes in the Bhagavad Gita. In this practice, the most important element is the remembrance of God. There could thus be four aspects or parts of the practice of self-surrender. One is meditate upon oneself as God. Secondly, consider God as the doer. And thirdly, surrender the fruits of actions to God. And finally, while undertaking any action, consider that the fruits may prove helpful to yoga. As in every spiritual discipline, there are dangers and pitfalls in the practice of self-surrender also. It is important to understand that the path of self-surrender is not one of inertia or laziness. In this, although the ego and the sense of doership is weakened, action is not abandoned. A person truly resigned will be intensely active and yet feel equally strongly that he is not the doer. Conversely, one may wrongly believe oneself as not the doer, or may deceive oneself or others that he has totally surrendered to God, and yet may be intensely egocentric. An example is given. Duryodhana's statement to Sri Krishna that I know dharma but don't practice it. I also know adharma but do not desist from it, because I do whatever you residing in my heart prompt me to do. That is sheer self-deception. A person who has fully surrendered to God can never take a single wrong step. Finally, self-surrender can be looked upon not only as a spiritual discipline or the goal, but a way of life, as an essential value to be practiced in day-to-day life. This is the purpose of Patanjali in including Ishvara Pranidhana in Kriya Yoga. Ishvara Pranidhana conduces to a tension-free state of mind. Our egocentric resolves and our intense desire for fruits of actions lead to tensions. Ishvara Pranidhana actually means living in the present without expectations or the thought of what is going to happen in future. One must live in reality and accept things as they are. According to Patanjali, the technique of Ishvara Pranidhana consists in the chanting of the syllable Om which is the symbol or indicator of God, together with the thinking of the meaning of the word. It is an effective means for concentration of mind and attainment of samadhi. So much is explained about the concept of surrendering to God, how we should not deceive ourselves in the name of surrendering to God. Surrender yourself unconditionally. The Vedas describe God as being Nirgun, free of qualities, and Niranjan, free of blemish. The Advaita philosophy, founded by Shankaracharya, explains this concept. God or Brahman does not have any gunas or qualities. The absolute Brahman is referring to. However, another great Acharya, Ramanuj, he explains that Nirguna does not mean that God has no qualities. It only means that God has no bad gunas or qualities. Ramanuj has described the various qualities of God in his work, Sharanagati Gadyam, very famous text. However, he became so fascinated by the quality of Karuna or Daya, compassion in the Lord, that his entire work is mostly about this wonderful quality of the Lord. Because of this quality, he comes to the rescue of all those who surrender completely to him. The Lord's compassion is limitless. No wonder then he is also known as Karuna Sagar, or ocean of compassion. The entire work on Daya Shatakam, all of 100 poems, this is also a famous text. It is composed by Vedanta Deshika, another famous Vaishnava saint, Vaishnava scholar. He is full of praise for the Lord's compassion. God is all powerful, yet he is generous and forgives those who seek forgiveness, which ultimately leads to their salvation. The entire principle of Vishishtadvaita, that is qualified monism, wears around Sharanagati, meaning total surrender to God. Vaishnavites believe that by seeking forgiveness through their Guru, they will be absolved of all sins and come closer to salvation. In Bhagavad Purana, when Hiranyakashipu asks Prahlad, his son, what's the best thing that he has learnt, Prahlad enumerates 9 ways of reaching God. 9 ways. And one of them is Atma Samarpanam. That is total surrender to God. That's one of the ways. God doesn't differentiate between friend and foe, man and animal, caste and creed. He comes to the rescue of all those who surrender to him with full faith and belief in him. There are many incidents in our Hindu scriptures and epics to illustrate this concept of God as the one who always comes to the rescue of the helpless who care to remember him, whoever it is. And there is a story, Gajendra, the king elephant, found himself compromised by a crocodile which would not let go of his leg. He realized that his herd could not help him. So, what did he do? Gajendra called out to Vishnu, who responded by rescuing and saving Gajendra from the crocodile. Of course, there is a story behind this. How could King Elephant could remember Lord Vishnu? Because in his previous life he was a great devotee of Lord Vishnu, and because he was a great devotee, when he was born as Gajendra, when he was in terrible crisis, he got the memory of the past life. He immediately came to know that he was not simply this king elephant. He was a great devotee of Lord Vishnu in his previous birth. So that prompted him to immediately surrender to Lord Vishnu and pray to him. So, when the story goes, Lord Vishnu came and saved Gajendra from the crocodile. In Ramayana we find Jayanta in the form of a crow had given unbearable trouble to Sita, but when he fell at Rama's feet, he was pardoned and his life was saved from the fury of Brahmastra. In order to save the life of an Asura, child, Prahlad, Vishnu took the form of Narsimha and killed Hiranyakashipu. The following incidents from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata encapsulate wonderfully the principle of total surrender to the Lord. During the Vastraharan, when Draupadi's honor was at stake, as long as she tried to protect her honor with her hands, the Lord did not come to her rescue. The moment she raised both her hands in despair and called out Krishna, indicating that she believed him to be the only savior, the Lord came to her rescue and saved her honor. Vibhishan, Ravana's brother, came to surrender to the Lord and fight on the side of Rama. The entire army of Sugriv was against this. They thought Vibhishan might be a spy from the sent by Ravan. But Ramachandra said that even if Ravan seeks forgiveness, he will pardon him. So that was the great quality of Sri Ramachandra, forgiving anyone, anytime. So he accepted Vibhishan on his side. So, surrendering unconditionally to God is one way of expressing our confidence in the divine, for faith works wonders. Next point is, aspire and strive for a life free from sin. No doubt it is to some extent desirable in this world for a person to earn a name and fame and also material wealth. All these things come to some people unasked. Others do not get them however much they may try. But these things do not attach themselves to us permanently. Either we leave them behind or they desert us in our own lifetime. Therefore, name, fame and wealth are not objectives for which we should consciously strive with all our energy. What we should aspire and strive for is a life free from sin. There are two aspects to this freedom from sin. One is absolution from sins already committed, papanasham, and the other is non-commission of sins hereafter by purifying our mind and making it free from evil thoughts. Evil thoughts means papa buddhi. The former can be achieved by absolutely surrendering oneself to God. That is papanasha. One can destroy the sins, the effect of sins, by totally surrendering to God. Realizing that He alone is our Savior, nothing happens without His knowledge, and that whatever happens to us, good or bad, is by His will and only for our ultimate good. Resigning oneself to the dispensation of God is the essence of absolute surrender. We will be free from evil thoughts hereafter only by bhakti or devotion, that is to say, by devoting every free moment of ours to His thought or repeating His names or listening to His glories. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna has given an assurance that He will absolve from all sin those who surrender themselves to Him, where the Lord has said, Sarvadharman paritijya mamekam sharanam vraja aham tvam sarvapapebhyo mokshishyami ma shuchaha. Lord Krishna asks Arjuna not to grieve, telling him, I will free you from all sins. Sarva papebhyo mokshishyami. If you give up all other dharma, sarva dharman parityajya, and surrender to me absolutely, mamekam shranam vraja. In this context, the import of the expression sarva dharman parityajya has to be understood correctly. The emphasis of the Gita is on each man, how he performs his duties in a spirit of dedication. Therefore, the call to give up dharma cannot be a message of inaction. Shri Krishna wants Arjuna, and through Arjuna all of us, to do the duties pertaining to our station in life. But what he wants us is to give up the notion that the performance of these duties will by itself lead us to the cherished goal. Shri Krishna wants us to perform our dharma, giving up the notion that they are the be-all and end-all of life, and surrender ourselves to him without reservation. In the verse previous to this one, Lord Krishna says, that is verse number 65, chapter 18, Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji man namaskuru mame vaishyasi satyante pradijane priyosi me. When Lord Krishna says to Arjuna, you are dear to me, it means that all of us are dear to him. So when he gives the assurance, satyante pratijane, and fall at his feet, mam namaskuru, all the words are very significant. Very significant. Manmana bhava, mad bhakto bhava, madhyaji mam bhava, mam namaskuru. Every phrase has got tremendous meaning. If we analyze one's affection towards one's son or wife, we will find that it ultimately resolves itself into one's love for oneself. A man is fond of his son only so long as that son fulfills what he expects of him. Supposing that son gets married and neglects his father, the affection will turn into hatred. It follows that the affection we entertain is with a purpose, and so not selfless. But there is no purpose or object behind one's love for oneself. When we come to realize that the I we love so much is he, our mind becomes saturated with him. That's the significance of the expression Manmana Bhava. We think of him not for securing any favors, but because we can't help thinking of him, having realized that the soul within us is none else than he. When this realization takes deep root, the mind enters the state of Avyaja Bhakti. We have examples of such selfless devotion to God in our scriptures. Akrura and Vidura had such Avyaja Bhakti. Dhruva and Prahlad are examples of those who surrendered themselves to God even from their childhood. Shabari and Kannappar, another saint, are examples of persons regarded as unlettered common people on the bottom rungs of the social ladder, who are animated by an overwhelming devotion in which the consciousness of their individual entity has been completely wiped out. Parikshit is an example of one who within the last 7 days of his life experienced the bliss of devotion achieved in a lifetime. Katwanga is an example of a person who got purified by concentrated devotion of 90 minutes. While Sharanagati helps to write off past sins, Bhakti alone will keep our minds away from sin. The heart has to be kept clean through Bhakti so that the full effect of his presence there may be realized. In the ultimate analysis, surrender and devotion are the two facets of the same thing. In this life, all householders are engaged in various occupations necessary to maintain themselves. While so engaged, their minds will be concentrating on their work, but it is during their leisure that their minds are likely to go astray. This leisure must be utilized in developing bhakti through various processes like Nam Japa, repeating God's name, Satsanga, keeping holy company, puja, worship, and Satkatha Shravana, listening to Lord's glory, etc. The idea is to somehow keep our thoughts engaged on God. We should have no occasion to commit sin through mind, eyes, ears, and speech. Even when we make any representations in our prayers, it should be in a spirit of detachment, namely with the realization that nothing is unknown to Him, and with the feeling, let Him do with us as He pleases. Let us in this way strive to pursue the path of surrender and devotion and earn the grace of God. Another aspect of surrendering to God is efficacy of surrender at Godspeed. It may be possible to come across men of integrity, honesty, diligence, piety, merit and humility, yet when the same persons come to hold power, more so political power, that makes them wield unrestricted authority over a long time continuously, it is quite likely that they may be reluctant to step down but stick on to that coveted position forever. Should they show an inclination to give up that destination, sycophants around them who have gained benefits because of their lenience and generosity are sure to goad them to remain in the seat. This eagerness to enjoy power is in human nature. Even thousands of years ago, when the country was governed by monarchs, God, who assumed a human form to protect the righteous and to remove evil forces, clearly said, it may be that crown and throne have cast a spell of fascination on him, a contingency that is neither unlikely nor unnatural. If it so transpires, come back to me quickly so that I may not embarrass him. These were the sentiments expressed by Sri Ramachandra on his triumphant return after 14 years of exile. The remarks were about Bharat, who had been administering the country for all these years as his regent, keeping the Lord's Padukas on the throne, awaiting Rama's return and ready to hand over the responsibility. So deputing Anjaneya, Hanuman, to go in advance to inform Bharat about his arrival in a few hours. Rama said, observe carefully Bharata's reaction. Contrary to such an anticipation, Bharat was ecstatic about his brother's homecoming, and what more, he was preparing to commit immolation if Rama delayed his return beyond the stipulated time. The Ramayana projects ideal brotherly relationship. The function of the epic is to interpret the great truth lying underneath, namely the efficacy of surrender at God's feet by anyone, even animal or God. Once a penitent resorts to this procedure, of course, which requires the adoption of a few rigid codes, God will lead him to his own kingdom, relieving him of his re-entry into the world. The monumental work reflects how learning, statecraft, courage and valor turned waste in the face of lust and obstinacy, in the case of a mighty emperor Ravan, who disregarded all pleadings to give back Sita, whom he had abducted. Evil counselors swarming around him brought about his downfall. Ravana's favorite queen Mandodari guessed that Rama was the supreme being who had landed in the world to re-establish moral order. In her song expressing sorrow, she extolled her husband's prowess, but never showed any insult to him, though she praised Rama. So surrendering to God is most effective way of reaching God, and this will also give complete fulfillment to our life. Sri Ramakrishna himself every time every time whenever he would speak, he would say, "It will happen by Mother's will. I will go there if Mother wills." So you can read in the Gospel, whenever Sri Ramakrishna speaks, he always expresses this view: it is Mother only making him act and speak. So surrender to God is the most effective way to reach God. So let us try to practice this concept in our daily life and make our life meaningful. Thank you. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavatu Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Hari Om Tat Sat. May the Lord protect us, may He nourish us, may our knowledge be fruitful and enlightened, may we not hate each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.